Well, hello, friends. We're back again. We are the Oneness Project. This is Sharon. I'm Steve, and you are you. And all of us are, of course, the Oneness. We are one, and that is what the gist of all of our videos are about. Um, we have been going to several different areas in the last little while that have been challenging for sure. And just a hint, it's not getting less challenging. It could be. It could be actually not challenging at all. But today, what we would like to get into is something that I think really is the heart of what brings us the peace and how oneness brings us peace. And kind of shows the conflict that creates the peace and creates the contrast to the peace as our mind that is the one mind, but in this individual consciousness comes to grasping this peace, and I guess you could say choosing this peace, eh, Sharon?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a choice we all have for sure.
There is definitely a choice it's one that we'll all make, but how we get there sometimes can be, well, always can be, always will be a challenge, it seems, for sure. Today we're going to talk about who are our enemies. And we'll look at some of the things that Paul had to say about this topic, Jesus had to say about this topic. A very challenging verse that I personally have heard a lot of sermons on. One thing that I've noticed that when I heard a sermon on a topic on a regular basis, that seemed to come up all the time. And this one came up all the time because people really wanted to know the answer to this question. What did Jesus mean about love our enemies? And Sharon's going to start in a verse that isn't exact. I don't believe it's what Jesus was talking about, but Paul opens the portal maybe even a little wider. So Sharon, would you like to start off with that verse?
Yes, I will. I'll give a little foundational thoughts before I get into the verse, but it's Colossians 1:21, and then Matthew, and then after that I'll read something from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:43 and 44. But just as a background, in my own life as someone who was involved in, a religious organization and thinking along those lines, I struggled with this idea of, enemies. I didn't want them. I knew I was supposed to love them, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So this oneness understanding that we have come to has helped me tremendously. In fact, it has completely eliminated the idea of enemy from my mind. So we're hoping today that this will do the same for you. All right, so where I want to begin is to say that these verses I'm going to read, remember that Jesus, when he's talking or teaching about enemies, he knows the oneness of all. He's the one that taught that he is in God and God is in us and we're in him. And that whole teaching tells us that we are one. We are of the one mind. Okay, and there is no separation. And he tried to tell us in different ways, but I like to start there because Steve always remind me that Jesus is speaking to people who don't understand the oneness. So he has to teach them on their level. But we want you to remember this, that there is only one God, and he's in, through, and of all of us. We consist of God. So we cannot separate ourselves from God. Therefore, we are one. And this is where the oneness idea comes from. Okay, with that background, I'm going to read Colossians 1, verse 21. And it says, this is Paul speaking. I don't know who Paul is speaking to, maybe one of the churches. And he says, and you who once were alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now he has reconciled. So to kind of paraphrase that, although I'm not sure if it needs paraphrasing, Paul is pointing out to these people he's talking to that they're enemies, and those who they're alienated from are figments of their imagination. They have created the enemy concept in their mind. But yet he goes on to say, Jesus Christ has reconciled. Yet now he has reconciled in his body, in the body of his flesh. He has reconciled them. So what that means is Jesus doesn't have enemies in his being. I looked up the meaning of the word reconcile, and what it means is to coexist in harmony. So when it says Jesus reconciled the enemies, right, it means that enemies are and friends, or whatever the opposite of an enemy is all one and the same together in Jesus. There is no difference between the two. And our enemies are mental fabrications, you might say. All right, so now I'm going to go on to Matthew, the famous Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is telling us or teaching us how to deal with enemies. Now, this is where I got stumped in when I was, on the path of a religious mindset. Jesus says, you have heard it said, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies and bless those who curse you, and do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you. Okay, and I'm skipping through. It says, for he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. So Jesus is saying here clearly, without dispute, I'm not sure how anyone can dispute that enemies, we are to love them. Connection lost. Are you still there? Connection was lost.
Keep on going. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so Jesus is saying clearly here that we should love our enemies. And for myself, I didn't know how to do that. At one point, I said in another one of our videos that I struggled with thinking my daughter was an enemy, sort of, because she decided to separate herself from the church at the time when I was a stalwart Christian, and I thought she was going to hell, and that's where enemies go, right? To hell. And I was in hell because of that thinking. I had no peace. Everything she did caused me angst and anguish. So I was not loving her, but I didn't know how to not love her. Okay, how to not, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to, did I state that correctly? I didn't know how to stop the feeling of her being an enemy in my mind. So you would say I was at war with her because everything she did, like I said, it caused me anguish, and I wanted to fix her and change her. And in essence, what I was doing is fighting a perceived war with war. So it was just creating more war, and we both were unhappy. So the teaching of Jesus to love your enemies, if I had really understood what that meant and understood the oneness of all, I would have understood. I would love her. She would not. She would be in peace, and so would I. You can't fight war with war. You have to fight war with love. And you only war against enemies. And Jesus says, love them, because that is the way to conquer the anxiety and the fear and all of those ill feelings that comes along with thinking you have an enemy. And then finally, what I want to say about that is, at the very least, if we can't, or if we think we can't love our enemies, can we at least thank them for being in our lives? That might take the edge off a little bit, because thank them for providing the contrast for us to peace, because we cannot experience peace without the contrast of an enemy, okay, without the contrast of war, okay, and the enemy provides a warlike situation for us. Oh, I'm sorry, someone knocked on the door and kind of frightened me. Probably UPS. I'm sorry. Anyway, I think I got my point across. At least let's try to love say thank you to our enemies. If we think we can't love them, thank them for providing a contrast for us to peace, so that we can know what peace is. Okay, yeah. Steve, I'm
No, that's great. And I'll post. We did something yesterday, I believe, on sort of the contrast of peace, the contrast needed to be able to have peace. In order for us to live in peace, there has to be a contrast to the peace, or we don't know that it is peace. So in that way, we can be thankful. Yeah, that's great. I love that concept. Thankfully, I can discover what peace is because there's a contrast to peace, and know what that contrast is. And in that way, which we talked about yesterday quite a bit, I'll post one that I did personally on that about choosing peace. And actually, we did it in our video too. Most important thing is we've come here to experience peace. So we choose peace over any influences other than peace. And this is what kind of Jesus is saying, or helping us do here with this verse. I'll go over a little bit backwards into what you already read. It said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, the word for love there in Greek is agape. And it is, I came up in religious constructs, and this was talked about a lot because people were really challenged by this concept of loving your enemy. And what they would say is, with agape love, is even though you're not feeling the love, to act with love towards your enemy as much as you possibly can. That's what he's saying. And in some ways, they were grasping that for your own peace, or in some sermons, it was just simply, that's a command, so do it. That's it. In other words, they're almost residing to the fact that it's really, really hard, but obey, because that's what you're supposed to do, which is really, as far as I'm concerned, very sick. To ask somebody to doesn't feel love to love to act in love.
It's impossible.
It's pretty much impossible. It is impossible because there's no fear in love, right? And enemies come from fear. So it says in the verse, you have heard it said, love your neighbor, using the word agape. So, and then a contrast, and hate your enemy, and then come to the next one and say, I say, love your enemies, with the same word. So what he's saying is, love your enemies in the same way you love your neighbor. Exactly the same way. I heard pastors try to get around this, and geez, I listened to one sermon on this, was like 2 hours long, of a very respected, well-read individual who I won't say his name here because, I don't want to, send any slander to someone, but he went around in circles for 2 hours on this concept. And at the end of it, I don't see how anybody could have went through it and he never answered the question. The fact of the matter is, he's saying to love your enemies the same way as you love those that you love your neighbors. Now,
But
in doing so,
just quickly interject. Your neighbor, and you're supposed to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's a high standard. So hopefully you love yourself a lot, right?
Yeah. Now, how can one do this? This is the whole question. How can one do this? So, first of all, he says you're children of the Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. First of all, he's claiming here that all of us are the Father of heaven, very distinctly. So the verses where it says, Jesus says, your father is the devil, is that contradicting this? Maybe we'll get into that some other time. Again, in the mind. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Now, who are the righteous and the unrighteous? That's the question, because he really stretches things out here now. He says, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Now, I'll tell you this right now, in those times, if you go into it, everybody hated it. It was fun to hate the tax collectors. The tax collectors were the lowest of the lowest, according to the Jews. Everybody hated them. The religious people, the non-religious people, the whatever. Everybody hated the tax collectors, because the tax collectors were coming to take far too much money and bring it back to the Roman guards and all of those things like that. But he says, even the ones that all of you really consider the enemy, don't they love who love them? So they love who loves them. Wait, there's somebody that loves the enemy? Yes. And guess what? The tax collectors are not their enemy. So who is the enemy? If you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that. Now it even takes it to a further level. Those that are apparently against God, the pagans who believe in other gods, the real evil people, even they don't have their enemies. And I suppose you would be enemies to them. So now everybody's the enemy. Everybody's an enemy to someone. And I say, love your enemies. So let's say that the pagans, the tax collectors, everybody love their enemies. How many enemies do we have?
0.
And the truth is, the enemy, as we said in Colossians, is only in our minds. There is no enemy. It's a concept created by individual consciousness, I suppose the mind, we're all in the one mind, that creates a contrast of peace and unpeace. And those that understand that there are no enemies live in the peace. So if you have someone in your mind that is an enemy, this says, love your enemy. Well, how the heck do I do that? I can't be afraid of something because there's no fear in love. So you can't fear your enemy. That's the first one. That's the first one you have to get over, is there's no fear in the enemy. 2, how do you love what you hate? It's impossible. So the only way to love what you hate or believe is an enemy is to realize that they're not enemies. So in his own way, Jesus was speaking to people, and I can just imagine the torment, and we can go through all of the scriptures that talk about the torment that God puts you through. Now, if I have somebody that I just do not want no freaking way, I hate that person, they did this to me, and my God says, love your enemies, how much torment is I going to have for that? If I'm in this, there's a time when we choose this or this, when we choose our peace over this. And when we choose our peace over this, we find out we never needed this because they were never our enemies. We are all one in the oneness of all. We are them. We've been there. We've been where they are. We are where they are. They are us and we are them. They are a contrast, as Sharon says. I love that. At the very least, we can reconcile the idea that they are a contrast so we can know peace. And actuality, it's the contrast of the mind that allows us to have peace. And I've found personally through this realization that the peace that it has brought me just comes in waves over and over and over again. And the people that I thought were enemies, just become not enemies even to me anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Not even, they stop acting like they're not like they're enemies.
Oh, you mean the external effect? We haven't even gotten into those types of discussion yet. But when it is absolutely true, when you have peace in your life, your environment, including the people in your environment, will reflect that. Okay, yeah. It probably falls under the law of attraction heading. I don't like the word attraction, but yes, who you are, you attract to you, and you'll find the people in your life start to behave according to the state of your being. So if you're agitated, the people in your life will feel it and more than likely reflect that for you. I mean, how many times have we, I know in my experience I've had this. You go into a room and there are several people in there, and one person in there has such a strong negative or agitated energy that you feel that. And you have to control yourself to not act out that feeling, that agitated feeling. If you're somebody who can control yourself, but how long can you control that if you're constantly in the presence of a person who is in unrest? You're going to affect your environment. So yeah, there are benefits, Steve, to external benefits to having peace.
Yeah, one of the things is
and by the way, how you just presented the idea that we're talking about was perfect. I couldn't have said it better.
Oh, well, I'm sure. I doubt that. Because you are amazing. I guess the final thing is that, I'll quickly go over Romans, where it says that he called him to them, and having called them, he gave them the right standing with himself, and having given right standing, gave him glory. 31, that what we should say response, if God is for us, who can be against us? This is Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Who's our enemy?
Mhm.
Nobody. Because God is for, if he says God is for us, who us is he talking about? Now, in this case, he might have been just talking about the people that are in the room. I doubt it. If God, it appears that God is for everyone here, because everyone thinks they have their enemies. And he's saying, love your enemies. So if God is for us, if God is for all, who is our enemy? Nobody. And if you don't think he was talking about all people there, remember that Jesus was for the people that were torturing him. He said, forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. He couldn't harm them. He didn't harm them. He could bring legions of angels. He could do all kinds of things to slaughter these people and hurt them and do all of this stuff, and never did a darn thing. In fact, just poured love on them. So, and if you hear or think in your mind that Jesus is not talking about truly loving your enemy like your neighbor, look what he did on the cross. In fact, he might even take it further than that. I don't know if you would die on a cross for your actual neighbor. And there's a verse that says that, let alone your enemy. So this is talking about a deep, deep, deep love that is so strong that it's like repulsive of us to hurt anyone, including those that are hurting us. And when we do that, we remove any thought of enemy from other people's minds, in which case we all draw closer to the oneness of what we are. That will enter into the hearts of other consciousness and break the barriers of and reconcile, as they call it, all to the one that are all. Offense does nothing of that. Offense only creates a separation of the mind. It's still not true. It's in our own minds. But peace, to strive for our personal peace as Jesus did, to love people to that level, will create more peace, and will create more peace for other people, and they will choose the peace over the offense. That's really what it was about.
And it's funny. Yesterday, I don't know how much time we have left. Probably not a lot, but
finish her off there.
Interesting. This thought came to me last night as I was thinking about this topic we're talking about today. That what if everyone around me had my face on their body, my head on their body?
Oh.
How would I treat them? Because this oneness, the idea that we're all one, the only reason we feel like we're separated from everybody is because they don't look like us. They don't have our appearance. We're looking at their physical form and thinking they're not us.
Right.
But what if our head was on their body? How would we treat them? I don't know. It's just a weird thought that entered my mind. So something to leave you with to think about.
Yeah, that love others as you would love yourself. And I've heard people say, well, if I did that, I'd want somebody to hurt me. No, you wouldn't. You justify it. You would realize that there's a reason for why you did what you did. You may feel like you're ashamed, but you would understand that there is something sick in you that caused this action that wasn't in peace. And when we realize that, we can then be in peace and create more peace by loving the ones that are causing these problems. I was going to go into pray for those who persecute you, but maybe that'll be our next video. And we love you all. For those that are watching, please share this around, send this about, like the video, and create a great algorithm for other people to be drawn to this wonderful peace that we've had. That's all we got for today. I think our next one will be Friday. And until then, lots of love to you.
Bye.